What is up, guys? It is March 22nd. We're out here in the garage getting a few things rigged up, and it's almost go time for me on the Detroit River. There's been a few guys that have kind of ventured out already, and they're catching fish, and there's definitely a lot of resident fish around still that are willing to bite, especially if you get one of those nicer days where the wind's not blowing 40 miles an hour and snow flurries. But they're catching fish out there. We haven't really had a big run from Lake Erie yet, so those fish haven't kind of moved into the river. There's been a few that have trickled up, but for the most part, we still haven't had that big run yet, and I don't really expect to see that until like the end of March. First couple of days of April is usually when it really turns to gangbusters and is on fire, pops off, like the kids say. But there was a 11, it was, I don't know the exact weight, over 11 pounder that was weighed in up at Hook One Bait and Tackle this past week for his derby. They caught it up there near Lake Huron somewhere, still in the river, but that's an absolute giant. Hopefully that's good things to come, and we're going to see some really big fish this year, and it's got me kind of excited. So if you're up there on the St. Clair River, stop into Hook One Bait and Tackle. They've got a derby running through the end of April, I believe. So get signed up for that. It's only $10, and there's a lot of raffle prizes and a lot of things you can win, and some cash prizes for those guys that win. That would be awesome if over an 11 pounder doesn't win and we could break that 12, maybe even get a teener weighting up there. That would be sick. So hopefully that's sign of good things to come. But I am going to break down from start to finish exactly how I rig up for the Detroit River. And I am not going to leave any stones unturned. Like I said, I'm going to go straight all the way from I've got braid on my reel to I'm putting a minnow on and dropping my bait down. So stay tuned. I'm going to go into extreme detail, and there's a couple little tricks that I use that maybe you don't know about. Maybe you know everything and you're a better fisherman than me, and there's a lot of you out there. But stay tuned. I'm going to break it down and go into as much detail as I can, and hopefully you guys learned something. All right, so like I said, I've got my spinning reel. I've got my braided line on there. This happens to be some Seaguar Smackdown 10 pound. It's a little bit cheaper than in the last video. I talked about the new Seaguar PX8 braid. I can't really quite afford to guide with 15 rods of that. So I've got the Smackdown. It's still like a little pricey, but it's not like the PX8. It's a little bit more economical than that. So that's what I use on my guide trips, and I've got it right here. The first thing I am going to do is tie on a micro swivel. And these things they're tiny. I mean, these are what steelhead guys use, and I believe VMC makes one, but you can see how tiny that thing is in my hand. And like I said, a lot of steelhead guys use these on their float setups, and this one is a Raven. It's an xxxs, so an extra small, and it's super strong. I never broke one. I've been using these for quite a few years. I used to steelhead fish a lot in the spring and in the fall, and never had a steelhead break one. So, and they go on some wicked runs. You got to pull them out of wood and all that kind of stuff. So if they're not breaking, then I'm not really worried about it on a walleye. So I am going to tie on the swivel onto my braid via the Palomar knot. And I believe the Palomar knot is the best, easiest knot, especially when you're tying with braid. It doesn't slip. So there's a few knots out there. If you tie something on with braid, it will slip off and you will be heartbroken. So use the Palomar knot. It will not slip. So I've got my Palomar knot tied on, and then I'm going to trim off my tag end nice and close. And there we go. We got our swivel tied on. So next, I'm going to tie on a leader, and I'm going to be using Seaguar's Invis-X 8 pound. And what I'm going to use is about an arm's length. So I know that my rod is a little bit longer than my arm's length. So the biggest key for me is not having the swivel go through my guides. So when I have my jig on my bait keeper, right here, I don't want that swivel to be inside my guides. So I'm going to tie on my leader accordingly so that I don't have excess leader and I don't have to reel it up. So I'm going to tie just a fisherman's knot and through my swivel. 1, 2, 3, 4. Go through the knot or the loop that I created. And then back through the new loop that was just created. Moisten it just a little bit, slide that one down. She's good to go. Trim off my tag end. So now I've got my leader tied on to my swivel, and then I've got my braid, which goes to my reel. So I'm going to double check just to make sure that my leader's not too long. Little extra on there, so I'm going to trim off a couple inches. And I should be good to go once I tie my jig on. It will not be too long. So I'm going to go in. I've got a few different things that I do with my jigs that are a little bit different than some people. All right, so in the walleye jig world, there's predominantly 2 different bait keepers that you're going to have on your jigs. So the traditional one, and this is just your lead collar. So the lead is down the shank of the hook a little bit. You slide your bait on there, and that lead collar is what's going to keep your bait from sliding off when you're jigging. The next is going to be a wire keeper style. So the wire keeper, this one is a Northland MVP jig, and they just actually came out with a 3/4 and a 1 ounce version of this. So those are available at northlandtackle.com, brand new to the market. They just came out, just released last week, I believe, but this one has a wire keeper. So depending on the makeup of the plastic that I'm using will determine which kind of jig I use. So if I'm going to use a jig or a plastic that's TPE material, so that's going to be something like this eye candy jig crawler, which is super stretchy. So, I mean, you can stretch these things a long ways. They last a super long time, and they've got a really, like this one's the natural core, just a nice little color, especially for some stained water. So if I'm using one of these, then I'm gonna be using the wire keeper jig. And the reason is the TPE doesn't stay on the lead collar that great. It stays on that wire keeper a lot better. And the reason why some guys aren't going to use these exclusively, these are a little pricey. They're an expensive jig, premium components, a very good hook on there, and a good paint job, eyes on there. So they're a little bit pricey, and that's why when I'm using TPE, I'm using the Northland MVP jig. So when I'm rigging this up, I kind of put it on there. I see where that bend is, right where it needs to pop out. So I'm going to get it as straight as possible. I don't want any kinks. I'm going to pop it out, and I'm going to slide it right up to that wire keeper. Now, when I get to that wire keeper, I'm going to grab this worm by the throat, and I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to hold on to the hook, pull it out, and slide up till it gets up to the top. And it kind of snaps. And now that baby's on there. And that wire keeper is going to keep it from sliding down. Now, you can put these on just a regular lead collar, but you're definitely going to want to super glue them. So the problem with super gluing them is you got to super glue them before you get out there, because it doesn't work that great in the cold and you want it to set up. Then that goes to your next problem. Once it's set up and it's glued on there, it ain't coming off. So that you're not going to be able to change plastics or anything. If you want to change the plastics, just do it the opposite way. Pull down, and it'll come off, no problem. But the fish are not going to be pulling this down. So when I'm using the TPE, I'm definitely using the wire keeper jig. Now, if I go to just normal, like this one's a Lonker City Finesse Minnow, these have caught a million fish on the Detroit River. They're old school. I'm just going to be using a lead collar jig on this one. They stay up just fine. The lead collar is a little bit cheaper. This one is an Eagle Claw Laser Sharp Pro V walleye. These ones are in 5/8, 3/4, and 1 ounce. New to the market this year, and they're pretty neat. I'm going to be using quite a few of these, as well as the Northland MVP jig. So if you're a guy that's just going to be using normal plastic, then that regular lead collar is just fine. The wire keeper is great, but if you don't want to kind of spend that much money on those, then your just regular lead collar jig is going to be just fine. One thing you're going to want to do though, like this is a Lunker City Finesse minnow straight out of the package. So the first thing that I'm going to do when I rig this up is I'm going to trim it a little bit. And you can kind of see where that minnow kind of goes up at an angle and gets a little bit narrower there. What I'm going to do is right where that minnow starts to angle up, I'm going to trim it straight. So now that is straight up and down flush. And what that's going to do when you rig it up on your jig head, again, nice and straight as you can get it. Pop her out. Pull it back just a touch. So now you have so much more surface area of your plastic minnow onto the lead that it's gonna stay up there a lot better. You're not gonna have like short bites and they pull it off. You can see like I'm tugging pretty hard and she ain't going nowhere. So that's a big thing for me, making that little incision. And then make sure you save these little pieces that you cut off, because we're gonna come back to this in a little bit. So we've got our minnow, or we've got our worm rigged up on our jig head. So now it's going to be time to tie this onto your line. So we've got our fluorocarbon right here. Got our jig head and our minnow. And again, I'm going to be tying a Palomar knot. That's just the one that I prefer. I can do it really quick. It's strong. I know I don't have to worry about it breaking. Moisten it just a little bit. Pull her tight. Trim our tag end. So now we've got our jig and minnow tied up. We're going to check it on our rod and make sure that our swivel is not in the tip. So you can see right there, I've got a little buffer from my swivel to my tip, and I've got my jig head attached to the hook keeper. So I don't have to worry about that. Now, if that swivel goes through the guide, it's on me. I reeled it. I got a little too excited and reeled it up, but usually don't have to worry about that. And I've still got plenty of leader. I mean, I've got almost 5.5 foot of leader. That's plenty out there on the Detroit River, especially when you're fishing that stained water for the walleyes. Not a problem. And if you break off, you're breaking off that fluorocarbon. You don't have to worry about leaving a bunch of braid in there if it breaks halfway down. That's the problem with the braid, is you never know where it's going to break. It may break at your jig and it may break at the tip of your rod, and who knows. So you might leave a bunch of line in the river and not even know it. With that fluorocarbon, you're going to break that fluorocarbon off before you break the swivel or the braid. So keep that in mind. Now we've got our jig head, and now a necessity for jigging, vertical jigging walleyes, whether it's the Detroit River, St. Clair River, you're gonna need a stinger hook. So this is a 3-inch Northland stinger hook. I believe it measures 2 5/8 to be exact, but the 3-inch model is what it's sold as. You're just gonna, and I prefer the dipped ones. So the problem with the slip stingers is that when you cinch them down, a lot of the times when you cinch it, it's going to kick it off up to the side. And that's not what you want. You want it to be straight in line with your plastic. So that way when that walleye goes to suck it, he doesn't get it all in his mouth, but he gets that stinger hook. And if it's off to the side, that's when you're going to hook them on the outside of the mouth. And they come off a lot, especially if you have it right in their cheek meat. That stuff just pulls right out. So you want it in their mouth, and that the dipped ones, they will be nice and straight. Just kind of working onto the jig head. Try not to hook yourself. And you're going to put it right on the bend of the hook. So this is the perfect length. The stinger hook sits right at the fork of the minnow. Some guys like to hook them into the plastic. I don't. I like to just kind of let it float. And this is monofilament, so it is going to float. It's going to be up off of the tail of your minnow, and you're not going to have any problems with that. So like I said, we're going to go start to finish. And if you're using live bait, we're not done yet. So we have our minnow tied up with our jig head. We got our stinger hook on. Now we're going to go back to that piece of plastic that we cut off. And I'm going to take my scissors, and I'm just going to kind of trim it up a little bit and just round it off. And we're going to be using this. So I'm just creating just a kind of a little ball. And we're going to grab our minnow. So this is a emerald shiner live minnow. We're going to take our jig head, and when the guys are saying they're tipping with the minnow, this is exactly what they're doing. They're taking this live minnow, taking the tip of their hook, and they're going to go right underneath the head, underneath the mouth, right out the top of the head. And they've got it on there. So one problem with just throwing that on there is this barb is not really that pronounced to keep this minnow on there. So now we're going back to our little piece of plastic. After we have our minnow on there, we're just going to cap it off with our little piece of plastic. So we've got our jig head, we've got our plastic, live minnow, our stinger hook, and then our cap. And then this is ready to drop right off the side of the boat. Keep it vertical, touch bottom, jig it back and forth, and you're ready to catch some fish. So that is start to finish exactly how I'm rigging up my Detroit River walleye setup. So if you have any questions, shoot them down in the comments below. I'm happy to answer them. There's no dumb questions. If there's something I did that you're not really sure about, please ask away. And with the worm, I'm doing the exact same thing. I am putting a stinger hook on there, a live minnow, and then I'm going to cap it. And I've caught a lot of big fish with a live bait and Jigs and Plastics. So early in the year, when the water's still cold, you definitely want to use minnows. Bring them at least. You want to have them. You never don't want to have minnows. When you come to the river with no minnows, you're asking for problems, especially early in the year. There's just some days where they want that meat on there. There's some days, obviously, where it doesn't matter, and you're gonna be digging out plastic out of their gut. So, if you guys like this video, please just show it down in the comments. Give me a like. If you guys are looking for a guide trip, I do have a few days, the first week of April left. Get a hold of me, 517-526-1304, smallmouthheavengs@gmail.com, lakestclairbass.com, however, Joe Bauer Fishing on Instagram. However you need to get a hold of me, just hit me up. I'll get you out on the water. I still have probably 5 or 6 trips left. Those are probably going to book up here in the next week. So if you're interested, please don't waste any time. Like I said, I don't have a lot of availability, but I have some. So get a hold of me, and appreciate it. If you guys made it this long, appreciate the support. Thank you guys very much. We'll see you on the next video.